a licensed clinical social worker with over 8 years of experience specializing in trauma therapy, with a rich cultural background blending Russian, Armenian, and American influences. Our guest today emphasizes the role of culture in shaping mental health and wellness. Today, as part of our special series on sex, sexuality, the influence of porn on society, I'm thrilled to be joined by Jana Bayramyan. Just as a heads up, today's episode will explore themes of an adult nature. We'll treat everything we talk about with respect, curiosity, and without judgment, but there may be words and topics that can make some feel uncomfortable listening in the car with the kids in the back seat. Janet's therapeutic approach is strengths-based and collaborative, helping clients process trauma, navigate life transitions, and develop effective coping strategies. She works with individuals from diverse backgrounds, including those dealing with addictions, relationship challenges, and unresolved trauma. Janet holds a master's degree in social work from the University of California and a bachelor's degree from California State University Northridge. Her private practice serves individuals and couples, both in person and virtually across several states in the US. Beyond her clinical work, Janet is an active member of professional organizations such as the EMDR International Association and Brainspotting Inc., of which more later, continuously advancing her expertise in trauma resolution. So there's a lot there to get at. So I think the first question I have to ask really is, can we take a step back and just talk me through your formative years and what helped create a person that's been kind enough to join us today?
Yes, thank you for that introduction. I feel like every therapist has had their own personal journeys that brought them to this field and to doing clinical work. And so I'm no exception to that. I feel like I went through my own challenges in life, in my early years and in my young adult years. And same, as far as my expertise, I chose the trauma field because I too had been through some traumatic experiences in my life. And so I really received some amazing support in my therapeutic journey. And once I felt like I started to move to the other side of that, I decided, you know what? I want to do that for somebody as well. I want to be part of their healing journey as well and provide support, provide tools, help facilitate certain processes that can help them. So, that's really why I joined the field, because I experienced my own trauma and I realized how survivors of trauma are just such resilient, amazing people.
Yeah, I think resilience is one of the words I hear most often, really, from people that have been through difficult experiences and haven't let them sort of take over their lives, really. And what
Mhm.
is it you think that gave you the power to be so resilient?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I always sort of had this intuition and sensitivity about when things were not right, when things just felt, wrong. And that was really since I was a little kid. Like I was always this child that was kind of questioning things. I think I drove my parents a little bit crazy. And um, and so for me personally, when I was going through my struggles, I just kind of knew like, this isn't how life is supposed to look like for me. This isn't how um, people should really live. I understand that people go through sadness, people experience all different types of emotions, but it shouldn't be like that 24/7. Like that's really what my intuition felt. So I feel like for me personally, I just thankfully have questioned a lot of
Mm.
things and didn't accept certain things to be a status quo. And that's what really got me to reading different books, learning about different types of therapies, going to therapy myself to get some help.
Do you think your background, sort of, I've mentioned sort of Russian, Armenian, American, do you think that had an influence on how you think about things?
Well, culturally, I know it's changing, but in like my parents' generation, the older generation, unfortunately, mental health is not really talked about.
Yeah,
Going to therapy is considered in the older generation, meaning like you're crazy or something is wrong with you.
yeah.
So unfortunately, I feel like I grew up with some stigma around talking about my experiences in mental health. And in fact, that is actually why I sought out a therapist that was of a similar background to me. You know, my therapist for many years that I've been seeing on and off, she's also of Armenian background. So
Mhm.
that cultural understanding made me feel more comfortable in the room with her. And that really helped me kind of break from some of that stigma because she understood, she got it. She was like, yeah, I totally get that our culture isn't always supportive or conducive to talking about mental health.
Yeah, it feels that maybe in the last decade or so it's got better or it's getting better. But I totally agree that for a long time, we've known it's important to keep ourselves physically active and healthy and fit and those sort of things. But we somehow, where we sort of join a gym and pay $100 a month, the thought of going to see a therapist once every 2 weeks and paying $100 just seems to be, yeah, just something that we don't really think about in the same way. But if I have a car and it's not running well, if there's something wrong with my washing machine or whatever, I wouldn't just assume it'll fix itself and go to a specialist.
Yeah.
And I do hope we are getting better at doing these things. And as you say, it's not about you're not going there because you're crazy or because something. You're just going there to sometimes just better understand situations and to help somebody put something into context or something that's different. Because, like you said, you sort of grew up and you thought things weren't quite right, and you knew that that wasn't how life should be. But when you get to talk to somebody about that, when I went to see a therapist, I found just talking to them and almost voicing things out loud just made such a difference. And it sounds such a basic thing to do, but yeah, just voicing them out loud, it just made me help me get things really into a better order, really. And you focus on a couple of techniques, one of which is EMDR, and one is brain spotting, terms that
Mhm.
I haven't come across before. So just if you could just explain what those are in terms that I can understand, that would be really helpful.
Sure, sure. So you talked about just now when, you know, in your experiences of going to therapy, talking and
Mhm.
talking to have a better understanding about your different life experiences. This is what we call traditional talk therapy. It's
Yep.
great to develop insight. And what it targets is our prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like our cognitive, rational part of our brain.
Mhm.
When we talk about trauma, though, and post traumatic stress, unfortunately, what happens is so much of the experience that caused us to have post traumatic stress gets stuck and stored in our body. It's almost like we kind of get frozen in that place or in that time, you know, and people talk about like, I have this flashback and it brought me back to when I was, for example, 5 years old when the
Yeah.
issue happened. So talk therapy, I don't mean to talk down upon it, but talk
Yeah.
therapy, while you will gain insight, you're not going to necessarily feel better in your body and, let's say, eliminate some of these flashbacks that happen. So, with EMDR, with brain spotting, there's a particular process that happens with your therapist where it actually helps you go much deeper in your brain. You're not going to be in your prefrontal cortex. You're going to actually move towards your hippocampus, your limbic system, where a lot of your emotions, your cognitions, your feelings are stored. And you're going to kind of reprocess your traumatic experiences in that part of your brain to actually start getting things moving and flowing and hopefully out of your body so that you're not feeling that level of stuckness or you're not feeling frozen in that
Mhm.
experience. You're also kind of maybe working through if there's shame, if there's, for example, certain beliefs about yourself that you're still carrying.
Yeah.
And so that's what is helpful about this process with EMDR and with brain spotting.
Mm. That was very understandable. Thank you. The can that be quite? I'm not sure what the right word is, but some like I say, we're learning more and more about how our body stores pain. There's a really good book called "The Body Keeps the Score," which is sort of about how the body sort of captures pain and can be historical pain, and sometimes we hide those things away. And is it really hard or traumatic to sort of peel back those layers to do you have to almost experience the pain again to rid yourself of the pain? I'm not asking the right question, sorry, but do you know what I mean? Is it a very difficult process to go through?
Well, everyone is kind of different, and everyone sort of processes their experiences at their own pace.
Okay.
I will say from like a general standpoint, it's not easy. Going to
Mm.
therapy is not fun always. Particularly processing your traumas are not fun, but it can be incredibly cathartic and it can be incredibly powerful. There are some clients, I'm just going to give some examples. There are some clients where maybe they don't want to dive into EMDR right away. They don't maybe want to feel certain things in their body just yet. And these clients, maybe they just need to talk about things for about a year in
Mm-hmm.
order for them to start feeling comfortable to go to the next step and the next layer of their therapy. Others, it might not require talking for a year. Others might be willing to jump into EMDR after maybe 2 to 3 months. Every person is just so individual. And what I like to express to everyone is to say, there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no right or wrong way to do therapy. So if you're that person that needs 6 months to a year of just talking and getting comfortable with your therapist first before you do that maybe deeper layer of therapy, that's great. Whatever works for you is great.
Mm. And you talked a lot before about collaboration and I took from that the fact that it's not down to you to this is a wrong word, but down to you to fix someone or to make someone better. That it's about the relationship between the two of you. So it's about the person trusting you that you're going to create that safe space for them. Is that how it works? That it very much is a two-way dynamic?
Absolutely. As the therapist, it is absolutely my responsibility to create that safety in the room. And what I often actually tell, some of the clients, or actually many of the clients that come into my sessions with me is that, and I tell them, you don't need to trust me right away. I don't expect you to trust me right away. I understand that the trust here is earned. And that's really important because, particularly for clients with trauma history, there's been likely a lot of betrayal in their lives. So, developing that trust maybe takes a lot more time, and that's absolutely okay. So, I believe we need to create that safety, and I don't expect people to trust me right away.
And do you ever find that the conversations you're in take you back to your own trauma, or is that fully resolved and you can focus purely on the person or family you're dealing with?
So, I would say I believe that the journey kind of never ends. Like there's always going to be layers and layers to look into and explore. So I continue to do my own, I would say, depth oriented work. And
Mhm.
sometimes I still do EMDR and brain spotting in my own therapy. And what I can say about your question here is I feel that I'm required to still do my own work because I can't ask clients to do something in sessions with me that I haven't been willing to do myself. And so, if let's say there's a client sharing their story or we're working on something and it triggers something in me, I know that I need to bring that to my own therapy in my next session so that I can work on that and resolve that. And I can say thankfully that, majority of like the deeply triggering things that I've experienced in my life, I have been able to work through. So that's why I can very confidently work with, clients of different backgrounds and different history. But, every now and then something might come up. So it is important for me to, of course, if there's a trigger, bring that into my next personal therapy session.
And I think as a patient or as a client, I think it would be very valuable, I think, to sort of recognize that they're dealing with somebody in you that has lived experience, that it's not just book learning or academics, it's somebody that hasn't necessarily sat in their chair, but has an understanding of what you're asking the person to do and what you're asking the person to explore, that you're not asking that lightly. You're asking that with a level of confidence in that it will create the right results. So I think it's funny, the more of these podcasts that I do and I talk to different people, so many people who find themselves in a caring profession or as a social worker or as a therapist or a psychologist or whatever the different terms are, has been through difficult situations themselves. It's very, very rare you get somebody that's had background was perfect, everything was wonderfully happy, and I thought I'd become a therapist. You just don't get it. People almost seem to have to have gone through that situation, and it almost gives them an extra layer of a sort of superpower in a way, really. It's funny. I don't know why. I hadn't thought it before I started doing this, but more and more I find that that's the case for sure.
Yeah, agreed.
One of the things I've been looking at in the last few months and talking to different people for a special series was really because I've got a 14-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter. And when I was growing up, just a long time ago, Pornography was a Playboy magazine hidden under your older brother's bed. And you might sneak a look at it, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a naked lady. Oh my goodness. That was Pornography. And that was it. It didn't move, it didn't talk, it didn't do anything. Whereas now, I think data shows that the average age that boys in particular access pornography online is 11, which is a long time before they understand what relationships are all about. And I just wondered, as a trauma therapist, as a therapist, what impact do you think or believe that accessing pornography at such a young age has on mental health and our understanding of relationships?
Yeah, there's a lot that happens. Pornography, there's so many layers to it. Like you said, there can be, like, let's say, a photo, of a naked person.
Yeah.
Also be, very intense videos, or media that is discovered on a phone, online. And I would say the intensity of it matters, because what happens when that initial exposure happens is that the brain basically fires so much, dopamine. Dopamine is sort of that pleasure centered chemical in our brain. And when a child is exposed to it very young, there's no like cognitive or conceptual understanding of many things, of what this is. And then the dopamine that's running through their brain, of, let's say, the arousal that they might be feeling in their body. There's no like understanding of what all of that is. So it can bring forth a lot of excitement in the moment, but it can also bring forth a lot of confusion, a lot of misunderstanding. And, I think that the difficulty is not only just the exposure of it, how easily accessible pornography is, but the fact that, let's say, children don't always go to a trusted parent or a trusted caregiver to talk about what they were just exposed to. I think if there was an opportunity for more conversation, I think the impact wouldn't be as intense as, let's say, a child being exposed to something and then they just kind of hold it inside and keep it inside and make sense of it themselves.
Mm. So I totally agree. I think a child's natural inclination is either to keep it to themselves or to share it with somebody else of the same age that isn't going to have necessarily a value contribution to make, really. And I think one of the challenges is that we have sex education in school, and it's good, bad, indifferent, depending where you live, and it's often about preventing pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, etc. But I think one of the challenges with pornography is it doesn't really, or doesn't at all, highlight the role that consent plays. It doesn't highlight the need for safe sex, and it doesn't necessarily create realistic expectations of a partner. And I have a friend that dates quite a bit younger, and she said she's noticed in the last sort of 5 or 6 years that there's an expectation from younger people for particular activities that are just they see as normalized because of what they've seen, as opposed to asking or seeking consent, really. And that's one, and I don't know how you overcome that. So how do you think parents or caregivers can navigate that conversation? So, because if they assume that their child's seen something by the time they're a teenager, how do they have that conversation? What are the key things to focus on? So, like, see, because you don't want the child to feel guilt or shame because sex is completely natural, absolutely. And amongst consenting adults, it's perfectly acceptable, whatever people do. But how do you have that conversation as a parent or a caregiver?
Well, you want to do your best to start very early to talk about. It doesn't have to even necessarily be about pornography, but it can be about talking to your child about their body, some of the changes that their bodies are going to go through, the feelings that their body will experience. You can sort of educate about arousal and what that maybe might feel like in the body. And so you want to have that conversation very early, actually as early as you can, of course, in an age appropriate way. And when your child kind of moves into that sort of adolescence or maybe pre-adolescent stage, you can talk to them about what's out there as far as media, as far as images. It doesn't even have to be pornography, but we can talk about social media. Even, stuff on Instagram or TikTok can be a little bit controversial and exposing, can be even semi-pornographic, right? So we want to talk to our kids about, while observing those things can be initially exciting, we want to talk to them about the impact that that has. We want to talk about how, this is not real life. This is fantasy. This is not kind of taking into account, like, if you're interested in dating or pursuing somebody or even being sexually intimate down the line, these images, this media doesn't take into account that this person has emotions. This person might have feelings, right? Like, this is just showing us like certain acts. And so we want to talk to our kids about that. We want to talk about how, in real life, exploration might look differently. In real life, we want to talk to the person about how they feel, what they experience in their body, what arousal might look like. So, I really think with our parents, maybe, and again, like, let's say my parents, we never really had these conversations. So we sort of have to really break that cycle with our own kids and really open up that dialogue so that if, let's say, down the line, maybe they were exposed to something by a friend or at school, or they happened to open up social media and found something, we want to cater to a safe environment so that they can come to us and ask us questions.
Yeah, I think that's one of your biggest hopes as a parent, is that your child or children feel comfortable coming to you to ask a question. And that's one of the greatest one of your greatest ambitions, really, that they feel comfortable. Because in a lot of societies, and certainly in a lot of generations, sex and pleasure hasn't been talked about openly, and things like self-pleasure and masturbation have been talked about or hidden away, or sort of talked about as being dirty, and you don't do this, don't touch that, you'll go blind, etc., etc. So no wonder children are confused when they're growing up to do those sort of things. Do you find with the people that you work with in terms of trauma. Do you find that people that have been through traumatic experiences are more likely to have other issues, things like addictions or compulsive behaviors? Does sometimes the trauma they've been through, does it sometimes manifest itself in addictive behavior?
Well, it depends. I mean, certainly it can. I
Mhm.
would say if we're talking about specifically like either a pornography addiction or any sort of like compulsivity, um, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there was some other traumatic experience that happened. But what I will say is that oftentimes there wasn't that comfortability always or that relationship with their parents that they could come to and talk about what had happened or what they were exposed to, right? i
Mm.
would say i would say if there was sort of that comfort or that experience where you could talk to a trusted
Mm.
adult, these now adults, but children at the time would not, I would say, have carried as much confusion or misunderstanding, let's say, about intimacy, about sex, about their body, if at the time there was somebody that, they could discuss what they were exposed to. So
Yeah.
people, unfortunately, like they hold what they experienced, what they witnessed inside, and then the behavior, unfortunately, oftentimes can continue because the brain is now constantly seeking that dopamine high.
Mm.
And so now it turns into sort of either this addiction or this, misunderstanding of what intimacy is, that now needs to be addressed in adult life. And often these people enter relationships and their relationship is sort of crumbling or not going well. So now they're in therapy to really deal with it. So sometimes there could be maybe a trauma background, but I've also worked with specifically men with an online addiction or pornography addiction where there was maybe no trauma. Their parents
Yeah.
were very supportive, but because the brain is constantly seeking that intensity, it's still manifested into this addictive behavior, this compulsive behavior.
How do people? How do you help people break that addiction? Because it's often deep rooted and can take up time and money and push other things in your life to one side. It must be a very hard cycle to break. So when somebody comes to you and you have that discussion and it comes out that this is why they really come to see you, how do you help them break that addictive cycle?
So we want to first work on changing the chemistry in the brain
Okay.
because as the therapist, I absolutely realize that I am asking my client to do something very hard, which is to kind of go into a withdrawal state, um, by abstaining, from the
Mhm.
stimulus, from the pornography, let's say, and really working on changing the brain chemistry. So sometimes I'll ask my clients for maybe a minimum of 30 days of abstaining to see what happens. It can be a little bit longer depending on, what the client is willing to do. But again, we're asking the brain to basically move to a different baseline as far as, the intensity and the dopamine. And then what we're really doing is we're exploring what intimacy really is, what intimacy means to that person. And
Mm.
a lot of it is maybe me educating the individual or having the client sort of re-explore what true intimacy looks like for them. It's again, it's not about shaming, what
Yeah.
brings them a sexual fulfillment or a sexual high, but we're trying to broaden the understanding of intimacy, moving away from fantasy and moving
Mm.
into what's actually real life, which oftentimes, it's their relationship that we're looking at. And once there is, let's say, maybe like the 30 days of abstaining, sometimes a little bit longer, up to 90 days, we're then asking the individual to understand what is going to trigger them to move back into that addiction, and then what is actually like a safe zone.
Mhm.
So it might mean abstaining from pornography, it might mean abstaining from social media. It could be any other compulsive behavior. I know some individuals have a hard time with online gaming, as
Yeah.
an example. So we're looking at what is going to trigger you to move back into that compulsivity and what is safe to kind of reintroduce in your life. So it's kind of a long journey because sometimes this is going to require trial and error to see what happens.
Mm.
Um, and I also work with my clients on developing a community because
Mhm.
you're not going to work through this in isolation. You're not going to work through this by just meeting with me one on one, 1 hour a week. You need to develop a community of support so that if, let's say, you are triggered, you have somebody to go to or you have a community to go to help you through that trigger, to help talk about it, to help you, not engage in that trigger if that's your goal. So there's kind of many layers to the work.
Mm. It's almost like having a sponsor if you're addicted to alcohol or narcotics or whatever. But and it's one of those things where these addictions to whatever the addictive substance is don't they don't suddenly appear. So they're not something that develops over like a week and then you're addicted. It's something that has typically can have a long history, I guess. So I guess it's helping people recognize that they're not going to be cured or the brain's not going to reset in a matter of days. It's going to take time to get through it, but
Yes.
it's good time. So and you've talked a couple of times about social media and being online, and that's the other that's the other thing as a parent. You're never quite sure how much time is the right amount of time to spend online on social media for your children or for yourself indeed. And I just wondered, is that something you see people coming to you with more concerns about now? As because and the reason I ask is that we don't necessarily know what social media or being on our phones, etc., all the time is doing to us. When you talk about those dopamine hits, and that's what you get every couple of seconds. It's a new video clip, or it's a like, or it's a share, or whatever. We're getting those mini hits, and I just wonder what's that doing to us? What is what is social media doing to us, and what do we think it will be like in the future?
Well, you're absolutely right. Every time we get a like, every time we get a share, it's almost like our nervous system gets that validation with that dopamine rush that we're experiencing. And I'm of the millennial generation where social media first came to be, like with Facebook when it
Mhm.
started when we were in college at the time. And so the younger generation, the generations behind me and now children, they're sort of this experimental group where they're kind of growing up with it at a
Yeah.
much earlier stage in life. And what I'll tell you is that, I used to work with children earlier in my career before I started my private practice. And even then, children were given iPads, children engaged in gaming. And I will say the children that like had the iPads all the time, engaged in gaming very frequently, had a lot more problems, had a lot more anxiety, had kind of these symptoms of ADHD versus the children that, let's say, grew up maybe in more humble beginnings and their parents, let's say, couldn't afford the iPad and all of these electronics. These children were actually a lot more calm, a lot less
Mhm.
anxious,
Yeah.
a lot more, I would say, in a regulated state in their nervous system. And so I absolutely worry about children that are on their iPads, exposed to social media very young, because it's like the nervous system can't handle just being, just sitting, just being
Mm.
bored. Like growing up, I remember like we were bored, so we had to play
Yeah.
outside, find activities to do. I remember with my friends as a little kid, we created like these imaginative stories and acted them out. Like it was very, very cute. I just worry about kids now, like they just can't sit and be bored, you know? And that constant need for validation and seeking that dopamine rush, like that's creating a lot of angst, that's creating a lot of anxiety, and we are seeing more ADHD symptoms develop. So yeah, I worry about that for future generations.
There was I read about an experiment recently where they did exactly just said that they had. I think it's slightly older. I think it was young adults between 18 and 25 maybe, and they're asked to sort of sit in a room with no devices, no stimuli, whatever, for sort of 15 minutes. And if they really, really, really couldn't cope with being on their own in their own thoughts, whatever, to press a buzzer to be released from the room. I think 80% of them couldn't last the 15 minutes in their head. They were so used to having some form of external stimuli. And I certainly from an older generation than yours, but yeah, we just didn't have any of that really. So it wasn't until I started work that thing came along. So I must admit, I'm very glad social media wasn't around when I was growing up, and there's no, not that I was a terrible child or anything or a terrible young adult, but that none of the things that I got up to and things aren't sort of captured for all of prosperity. It's really hard, and I think I'll often walk along, and there'll be a parent pushing a youngster in a pushchair or a pram. The parent will be on their iPhone or smartphone. The child will be on a iPhone or an iPad, and there's little interaction, and I do wonder what, yeah, like I said, what impact that will have in the future. And it's almost, as you say, this generation is almost one mass experiment that we're going to see what happens at the end of it. But it will be. There's already evidence that shows people make less phone calls. People are not as good at eye to eye contact. People find it harder to engage in conversations. All of those things, which are such powerful skills to be able to have a conversation with somebody. And it's such a shame if social media does take that away from us. But yeah, we will see. There seems to be no rush to legislate against it, because I guess in some ways we don't know what to legislate against. We don't want to stop people connecting. Because being able to connect across the world is amazing, but yeah, trying to understand what it means. I think Australia is bringing in a law that you have to be 16 to be able to use social media.
Okay.
So they're sort of recognizing some of the barriers around it. And one of the things I wondered about sort of that and what we are talking about before is how important it is to be able to. This might be an old way to put it, but how important it is to be able to love ourselves and to be able to, yeah, feel confident in who we are as people. And I just wondered if you sort of felt, yeah, that's important, that we should be able to love ourselves in order, some ways, to be open to love of other people, but that our own self well being is super important.
Yeah, and I love that you're bringing that up because I think that's part of whether people say it or not, kind of an underlying goal for a lot of the individuals that come into therapy. And I know they might come in because maybe there was a trauma or maybe they want to work on their relationships. But I do think at the end of the day, there is this profound desire to be happy with who we are, be confident in who we are, um, love ourselves to a degree. And I do think it is important to really work towards that in order to have fulfilling relationships. And I'm not saying that we have to fully love ourselves to meet someone and be in a positive partnership. Sometimes it works the other way around. Sometimes we're working on ourselves and we're fortunate enough to have somebody come into our lives that kind of mirror that love and support, that we wish to give to ourselves. So it is absolutely such a important goal, and I know that it's important to explore that. It's important to model that if you're a parent as well with
Mm.
your kids.
So what brings you happiness and joy?
Well, now currently I would say it's I'm in this new motherhood phase, and there's this term called matrescence where, particularly mothers sort of transform once a child is in their lives, and priorities change, our desires change, what we believe about ourselves changes. So that's personally what's bringing me a lot of joy. But I would say prior to motherhood, and this is something that still brings me a lot of joy, but being in nature, I feel the most calm, grounded, at peace, when I'm in beautiful nature, and fulfilling relationships. When I get together with people that I feel most myself and comfortable with, I don't need my device. I'm able to put it away and just be very present with them.
Mm. And your whole career is really about helping to support, empower, and guide others, which must take a lot of your mental energy. And I just wondered, how do you make sure that you take care of your mental health and physical well-being? How do you make sure you're in the best possible space that you can be for other people?
Yeah, well, I think it's about going back to the basics. So getting a good amount of sleep as best as I can, in this new motherhood phase.
Sometimes it's out
Um,
of your hands, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. Um, Getting my own therapy is absolutely really important. But I would say, as a clinician, it is important for me to help people get to their authentic selves. But I learned that, I can't bring a lot of their issues home with me.
Yeah.
That it's every kind of individual's responsibility to work through their issues. I'm sort of like the sounding board. I'm the facilitator, the guide, but I'm not responsible. It's everyone's individual responsibility. And that helps me sort of keep work as work and then go back into my daily life, and not think about challenges or problems.
Mhm.
And also just doing my best to have boundaries as well is really important. Boundaries make me feel more grounded and at peace as well in my day to day life. So I think those are all kind of the factors that help me personally.
So somebody out there is listening to this, and they have a trauma in their life, and they've been considering going to talk to somebody or explore something, but something's always held them back. What could you say to them that might help them take the first step on that journey?
Yeah. Well, just know that if you're going to seek out therapy or if you're considering it, you don't have to dive into it right away. You don't have to talk about what happened if it's too much. You can ease your way into the therapeutic process, and your therapist will help you through it. I
Mhm.
will also say that I want to be very realistic. We're not here to eliminate the memory. That's not possible. If we could, we would do that, but it's not possible. But really, what trauma therapy is about is, if you remember that experience, it's not going to take hold of you in the same way that maybe it had before. Your nervous system will feel lighter. You will feel more calm. You will feel more at ease. Might even make meaning from the experience. And I will say that's going to take some time, but if you can get there, it's absolutely worth it. Doing my own trauma therapy has completely changed my life. I can't imagine now being where I was maybe even like 10 years ago. And so there are payoffs to it if you're willing to take that step.
And what do you think the future holds for you, apart from looking after your new baby? What does the future look like for Janet?
I have always had this goal of just cultivating more joy in my
Mhm.
life, because my job is so serious, and I grew up as an only child, so I feel like I kind of have this more serious kind of demeanor. So I want to cultivate more joy. I want to laugh more. I want to have more fun experiences. And I'm excited to do more things as my little one gets older and kind of observe the world through his eyes, through kind of those wondrous eyes again. So I'm really excited to dive into that stage.
It's funny. One of the things I found with having our children is you must get permission to be a child again. So if a dad or a mum walks along the street singing out loud, or you're skipping with your child, or you're playing in a sandpit with it's fine. If you did it by yourself, people would definitely recommend a therapist. But you suddenly have this, permission to sort of laugh at stupid things and to build silly things, and like I say, to have those sort of imaginative games and things. And just, I remember with my son, gosh, when he was 4, was just skipping along the road, sort of a 35-year-old, whatever, 4-year-old man. It's like, what are you doing? But it was so, and laughing at nothing really, just
Oh,
that having, I think children do bring joy for sure. So enjoy it for sure. No, I just want to, sorry, thank you so much for your time. You've been really fascinating. You're very kind, and I really
thank
do
you.
appreciate what you're doing. I think you're doing great things, and I would just hope you keep doing it. And I'd love to sort of learn more about what you do in the future. So I think I have to say to you that I think there's definitely a writer in you. I think maybe getting some of this on paper, I think would be good. I think I don't know why I talked to a really interesting guy called Andre Bradford a few months ago. He's a slam poet. I'm not saying go and do slam poetry, but just that he has so much joy in expressing himself through himself and his ideas through words. It was just, I never come across somebody that had that much joy. So if you're looking for something to bring joy, maybe give slam poetry a go. But no, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.